The first body detective, Emily Grayson, had seen her share of gruesome crime scenes, but something about this one felt different from the moment she arrived. It was a cold October morning when the call came in. An unidentified man found dead in a downtown alley. As she approached the scene, the stench of blood hit her, but it was the victim's precise injuries that unsettled her. His throat had been slit with surgical accuracy, the wound clean, methodical. There were no signs of a struggle, no witnesses, and no identification. The killer had left behind one chilling clue, a message scrawled in dark red letters on the nearby brick wall, first of many. Emily stood silently, her sharp eyes scanning the scene, cataloging every detail. The alley was narrow, damp, and empty, with no sign of who had committed this brutal crime. The city had its share of violent incidents, but this was different. The calculated nature of the killing told her they were dealing with someone who planned their moves with chilling precision. Back at the precinct, Emily and her partner, Detective Mark Owens, pored over the evidence. The victim had no criminal record, no ties to the city's underworld, no immediate reason to be targeted. Emily's instincts told her this wasn't random, but without a motive, they were left with more questions than answers. She placed the crime scene photos on her office board, each one a piece of a puzzle she didn't yet understand. The message loomed large in her mind. First of many. As night fell, Emily lingered at her desk, staring at the photographs in front of her. The man's empty, lifeless eyes haunted her, but it was the message that truly unnerved her. A promise of more violence to come. Her gut told her that this killer wasn't finished, that this was only the beginning of a dark, twisted game. She couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had committed this murder had done so with a purpose, a plan. And if they didn't figure out what that plan was soon, another body would drop. The hunter was out there, lurking in the shadows, and Emily knew the chase had just begun. This content may violate our usage policies. Did we get it wrong? Please tell us by giving this response a thumbs down. Patterns and shadows. The second body surfaced just days later, confirming Detective Emily Grayson's worst fears. A young woman killed with the same chilling precision, a single clean cut to the throat. Once again, there were no witnesses, no signs of a struggle. But the killer had left another message at the scene, this time more ominous. No one is safe. Emily and her partner, Detective Mark Owens, worked tirelessly to find a connection between the two victims. The first was a middle-aged man, while the second was a young woman in her 20s. They lived in different parts of the city, held different jobs, and had no shared acquaintances. There seemed to be no obvious link, but Emily was certain it was there, buried beneath the surface. Frustration gnawed at her as they combed through the victims' histories. The media had already picked up on the pattern and dubbed the unknown killer the hunter, sending the city into a state of fear. Emily knew they were racing against time, each day that passed bringing the hunter closer to his next kill. Late one night, as Emily reviewed surveillance footage from the area near the second crime scene, something caught her eye, a shadowy figure lingering in the background. The camera had barely picked up the movement, and it was impossible to make out any details. But Emily's gut told her this was the killer, silently watching his prey before striking. It was confirmation of her suspicions. The murders were not impulsive. The hunter was stalking his victims, choosing them with care. As Emily delved deeper into the psychological profile of the killer, she realized something unsettling. This wasn't about the victims themselves. They were symbols, part of a larger plan only the killer understood. The precision of the kills, the cold, methodical nature, and the cryptic messages all pointed to a carefully orchestrated game. Despite her best efforts, Emily found herself always one step behind. The hunter was clever, meticulous, and he seemed to be playing with them, taunting them with each new victim. Every message left in blood carried a chilling weight, but it was the one truth that haunted her the most. This wasn't over. The hunter was only just beginning. This content may violate our usage policies. Did we get it wrong? Please tell us by giving this response a thumbs down. Into the mind of a killer. The third murder shook Detective Emily Grayson to her core. This time, the victim was someone she knew, Detective John Carter, a fellow officer and a friend. His death marked a turning point, not just for Emily, but for the entire precinct. The hunter had struck close to home. The message left at the scene was more personal than before. "You should have stopped me." Emily was consumed by guilt and anger. She had been chasing this killer for weeks, but now it felt like the hunter was chasing her. Carter's death wasn't just another victim, it was a direct challenge. The killer was escalating, and Emily knew she had to act quickly before more of her colleagues became targets. Determined to catch the hunter, Emily threw herself into the investigation, working long hours, obsessively analyzing every detail of the case. She consulted with criminal profilers, hoping to gain insight into the mind of the killer. The profilers confirmed what Emily had already begun to suspect. The murders weren't about the victims themselves. The hunter was sending a message, and each victim was chosen as part of a deliberate plan. Emily began to see a pattern in the killings. The victims, though seemingly unconnected, represented different facets of society: a businessman, a young woman, and now a police officer. The hunter's message was growing louder, and Emily knew it was building towards something bigger. But what? In a desperate bid to understand the killer's motives, Emily began reviewing old case files, searching for any similar murders that had gone unsolved. She came across a case from 20 years ago where a man had been killed in a similar manner. The prime suspect back then was a surgeon named Dr. Richard Carson, but he had never been convicted due to lack of evidence. Carson's life had unraveled after the trial, and he had disappeared from public view. Emily's instincts told her that Carson was the key. The hunter was seeking revenge, not just against random victims, but against a system that had wronged him. Emily was closing in on the truth, but the hunter was always one step ahead, and she knew that time was running out. The hunt had become personal, the final hunt. Detective Emily Grayson's investigation had finally led her to Dr. Richard Carson, the man she believed to be the hunter. Carson, a disgraced surgeon, had vanished after being acquitted of a murder years ago. Now it seemed he had returned with a vengeance, targeting the city and taunting Emily personally. With a warrant in hand, Emily and her partner, Detective Mark Owens, tracked Carson to an isolated cabin deep in the woods, far from the city. As they approached the cabin, Emily's instincts were on high alert. She knew Carson was dangerous, brilliant, and had nothing left to lose. The hunter had been playing a calculated game all along, and now Emily was stepping directly into his lair. Inside the cabin, they found undeniable proof that Carson was the hunter. Photos of the victims, surgical tools, and chilling handwritten notes mapping out each of the murders. But Carson himself was nowhere to be found. The cabin felt eerily abandoned, yet Emily could sense they were being watched. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. Mark fell to the ground, hit in the shoulder, and Emily's heart raced. She saw Carson retreating into the woods. Without hesitation, Emily pursued him, the darkness of the forest closing in around her. The air was thick with tension as she navigated the dense trees, knowing Carson had likely set traps along the way. The chase was intense. Carson was fast, but Emily was driven by anger, guilt, and the need to end this once and for all. The hunter had taken too many lives, and now he had tried to take Mark. Finally, Emily cornered Carson at the edge of a steep cliff, the lights of the city far below them. Carson, disheveled but calm, stood with a twisted smile on his face. "You think you've caught me, detective?" he said, his voice cold and taunting. "You're just another piece in my game." Emily leveled her gun at him, her hands steady. "It ends here, Carson." Carson took a step back, his eyes wild, and with one final defiant laugh, he plunged off the cliff into the abyss below. Back at the precinct, Emily sat alone, the weight of the chase finally lifting. The hunter was dead, but the scars he left behind would remain. The game was over, but Emily knew she would never forget the hunt.